Here's an issue that I have. Sometimes people will be pro-life, but they'll say, well, if it's rape, that's different. We can have an abortion there, okay? It would be unfair if I dropped off a child at your doorstep and I just left it there and I ran away, right? Unconsensually, I'm giving you a kid, basically. But nobody would ever say if we opened the door and we saw a child we didn't want, we could just step on its head and crush it, right? Like that. Obviously, that's not okay because you've decided as a child, we're not going to kill children, right? I don't understand how some people that are pro-life can say, I am pro-life because I think fetuses are alive and they're worth protecting, but in the case of rape, we should probably kill them. Like, it feels like you either have to protect it always or you can't protect it ever. How do you make an exception there?
I'm Zoe.
Zoe, what's up?
What's up? I guess I have to start out by saying, for any girls watching, I'm a girl's girl. Like, I do believe that there are extenuating circumstances that abortion should be permitted.
Okay. Already starting off weak, conceding a little bit of pro-abortion arguments, but okay, go ahead.
Well, not necessarily pro-abortion, but I do think the idea of abortion now versus, say, 5 years ago, we've taken it to the extreme.
Okay.
And we're seeing it used more as a contraceptive method than we are a, I guess,
emergency use.
Yeah, like last resort emergency use.
Okay.
And that's where my personal issue is with it. I think that in circumstances of rape, when you're an adult woman, now this is going to get me some shit, but when you're an adult woman and a rape does occur, I think that knowing Plan B is an option and not wanting to have the potential of conceiving and carrying a child, that's an option that is there to take. Now it's different when you're, say, an 11, 12-year-old kid.
When you, just so I can be clear, are you saying that Plan B for you doesn't count as an abortion, or?
No, I believe that life starts at a heartbeat.
Okay.
I think that a heartbeat defines life, and I know you're arguing about consciousness and that defines life for you, but I think that in the case that, like, we're all, like, as soon as it has a heartbeat, it has the ability to develop more organs, and that's what starts out everything else.
Okay.
Like,
I'm going to push you really hard on the heartbeat thing, okay? Ready?
Ready.
Okay. So let's say theoretically we have a human, and they're hooked up to, like, bypasses for kidneys, isn't it? Let's say there's like a hard bypass. There's got to be a hard bypass device, I would imagine.
I'm sure.
But let's say you could hook somebody up to a hard bypass. You give them like a fake heart or whatever.
Right.
Like, would you argue that this person is like lost part of their humanity, or are they still like fully a human, or?
I mean, they're still fully a human, I would say. Like, I don't know. That's.
What about like, let's say you have like a baby developing
thing.
with like a congenital heart defect, and you give them like a fake heart at like 2 months old or whatever, or like right when they're born, you swap out their heart with like a fake heart. Do you think that like that person is still growing and could be like a normal human, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so what if you swapped out their brain?
I mean, that's not possible.
Sure, I agree. I don't know if the heart thing's possible.
That's not really
Yeah,
possible.
I understand. So I guess like the point that I try to get at is that like I feel like the heart beating doesn't have much to do with why we value human life. Like it moves blood throughout our body, and that's cool and all. But I feel like when we think of like what does it mean to be human, or what is it like to be human, we're usually thinking about like the experience that we're having in our heads, right? There's like there's a feeling, there's a phenomenon of like being human, the experience of being human, and that's usually the thing we're trying to protect, rather than like a heartbeat or something, right?
Right, and I guess so where I kind of disagree with you on the consciousness aspect is once they have a brain, like even though it doesn't have all of the things plugged in, you know, to give them that conscious experience, they have a brain. You know, they have a brain, they have a heart, they have a stomach, they have organs, like they have all of the limbs and extremities that make them a person.
Sure.
Just because they don't have the conscious experience yet of being a person doesn't necessarily negate that fact.
Sure. So here's like, I guess like the question then is, let's say I were to ask you like, what do you think it's like to be after you're dead? Ignoring a religious answer.
Oh, I have no idea.
Sure. Or like, what is it like to be while you're asleep and not dreaming?
It's just nothingness.
Yeah. So
But-
if I'm taking like nothingness and I'm ending that nothingness, like what is the harm? Like who's being harmed there? Because it seems like there's like a body of a fetus to speak of, but there's not a person to speak of in terms of like if I kill you, which I would never do, but if I kill you, there's like a person, there's a Zoe that is like, there's an experience to be you, there's a thing that's there, and then there's a thing that's ending, which would be bad. But for a fetus, there's not even like a thing that knows what it's like to be yet. So what are you actually ending there that's like, yeah?
I mean, I guess my idea behind it is if we're going to look at abortion as not being like ending a life, I don't understand then why when a pregnant woman is murdered, it's charged as a double homicide. Like,
True.
if that's something that we're not going to count a child, like a fetus, as a person, then why are we counting that as a double homicide?
Yeah, I agree. And that could be a legal hypocrisy. Like if you kill a woman and she's 2 weeks pregnant and then you're charged with double homicide, it seems like, well, in that case, abortion should absolutely be illegal, right? Because we're counting them as a person. So I would agree
Right.
there. But that's a downstream legal question. I would say that needs to be like, you need to figure that out. But
Right.
yeah,
And
a little detached
that's
from
for people.
the moral argument. Yeah. But I still think it's fundamentally different than the moral question, the ethical question of like what is the harm of killing a thing that doesn't know what it's like to be yet? Like what are you ending there that's bad?
I mean, kind of what everybody else was saying. It's the potential life, and it's ending a life that isn't your own when you really think about it. Like, yes, it's your body, but at that point, you have a second being inside of you. There are two bodies. There are two beings.
Isn't it kind of like another organ, kind of? I mean, because for a while it's just a thing growing. It's attached by the umbilical cord. Is it really its own separate thing yet? I feel like there needs to be like a conscious experience here. Otherwise, it's literally just a thing growing in your body, right? Like it could be a tumor for a few weeks and you wouldn't even know. Or I don't know how long it takes to figure out when if it's like, but
I mean, you can take a pregnancy test a few weeks after conceivement and comes up as positive. It's different for everybody, but I definitely wouldn't agree that it's a tumor. It's
no.
it's a
Or what
baby.
I mean is like they can develop into tumors. Sometimes you've got like complications with pregnancies. But
Yeah.
I guess kind of circling a bit.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. I guess my question is just like I don't see what is if you terminate like a 2 or 3 week old fetus.
See,
like
I don't have
what's-
an issue with that. That's a different situation.
or 10-week fetus.
My thing is heartbeat. I think that that's somewhere that kind of a line is.
Do you know when
I
about the
also think
heartbeat starts?
That's about 8 to 12 weeks. Somewhere
Okay,
in that
so let's
first
say
trimester.
Yeah, 8-week baby, heart is beating, still no conscious experience. If you terminate that pregnancy, like what is the harm being committed? Like who's being hurt?
I honestly think that people kind of forget about the way in which an abortion affects the mother.
Sure.
Like the stigma that surrounds it morally and all of that definitely has a detriment to the mother.
That's true. Although it's a fundamentally different topic, and having a kid you don't want can affect the mother too, right?
Right. But that's when things like adoption and things like that kind of come into play.
Sure, but there's a lot of kids that need to be adopted right now, right? I mean, I don't know if like saying that we could just adopt out all the kids. And then there's also the whole like
Significantly less so here in America than there are.
maybe, but like I mean, if somebody could have an abortion at 1 month, that's an option, or they could carry it all the way to term and then adopt the child afterwards. That's going to be like a much more involved experience probably than just having the abortion, right?
Right.
Because if there's like a stigma or there's a bad feeling attached to having an abortion, which I agree there can be sometimes, it's probably going to be a pretty big one for like giving birth to a baby and then giving it away immediately too, right?
Yeah, but I think it kind of goes into the conscious experience or not the conscious experience, but the conscious decision to have sex. You have sex knowing that pregnancy is a risk. It's
Sure.
something that you are consciously making the decision to do. Now, we can argue rape, incest, those things, but that in reality is a very small margin of abortions that are performed. And so when you actually look at, the statistics of it all, a lot of the times it is being used as a form
Contraception, I
of
think.
birth control.
Sure.
And that's where I have an issue.
Okay, I'll do one thing. I'll give you the last one on it. I feel like I feel like there's just saying that because you're having sex, you consent to a risk of a thing doesn't mean you can't do other things to mitigate that risk as well, right? Like
Right.
somebody might say, well, if you have sex, you could get pregnant. It's like, okay, why wear a condom? Okay, well, if you wear a condom, you could still get married. Okay, well, I have an abortion, right? Like just because there might be risks to something doesn't mean there aren't like extraneous ways that we can kind of mitigate the risk. Like I drive a car doesn't necessarily mean I consent to being in a car accident, but like I'll wear a seatbelt and I'll do what I can to mitigate that risk, and then I'll go to the hospital afterwards if I need to. But I think that the idea that like just because when you have sex there's a risk of having a pregnancy doesn't mean that therefore if it does happen happen, you're somehow obligated to all of the outcomes. Like ectopic pregnancy is theoretically a risk of having sex, but you're
Right.
not forcing someone to die if they have an ectopic pregnancy, right?
Right.
And then I'll give you,
no,
go ahead.
but that's a very, once again, like the ectopic pregnancy, that's a very small percentage of pregnancies, and that's a very small pregnancy risk. Not a lot of women have that experience. Now, that's not to negate the experience whatsoever, and I do believe that there are medically necessary reasons to have an abortion, like the mother's life is at risk, or the baby is not a viable life, like it's
Sure.
born without a heart. It's going to be born without a heart. It's going to be born without a brain. It's going to be a stillbirth. I think that those are things that there are medical reasons for an abortion that make it very different. But I do believe that the idea of using abortion as a form of birth control has gone kind of way outside of what it was intentionally
Intended for.
intended for,
Okay.
like
All right.
originally intended for.
Well, listen, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
How's it going? My name's Derek.
Derek.
Yeah. No, I'm not entirely pro-life, but I do. I'd say I lean more towards that. So obviously, I think women should be able to have abortions before a certain point, but I think after that point, like that point for me is when the baby's alive, and after that point, I don't think the baby should be able to be aborted.
Okay, we might end up agreeing then more. For me, it's around 20 to 24 weeks. I think before that you can have an abortion, but after that, like people talking about like third trimester abortions or abortions like right before delivery, or that's pretty crazy.
Heck no,
that's probably not good.
That's
yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah, for sure. I think most
Obviously-
people in America even are against like third tri. Yeah.
For sure, but like I mean, obviously you make exceptions for medical emergencies,
Of
rape,
course, yeah.
incest. I think that's just a common sense point of view, and I feel like I fall into that category, but I feel like 2024 is kind of late in my opinion.
Okay.
What
What is the thing for you like when you're like this is probably when a fetus should be
Heartbeat.
protected? Heartbeat? Why heartbeat?
When else would you do it? What
I think-
happens at 24 weeks for you to
Brain
consider
development to have a conscious experience is what I'm looking at.
that? Is that when the baby starts to feel something?
It's when it has like the awareness and experience of like being a human, basically. Before that, it's just like basic response to stimuli, like brainstem stuff. I think.
I don't think that's right though.
What do you mean it's not right?
It's alive, you know.
Well, I mean, like your
it's
knee
a
is
life being.
alive. Like there's a lot of things that are alive, but when are they worth like protecting, right? Because like a single cell organism is alive. Like even the zygote, as soon as you're conception.
Yeah, but I think there's a fundamental difference between that and a human.
Well, what's the fundamental difference? That's the question, right?
It's because I don't think using brain capacity as a point of measurement is like valid, because if the issue is whether it's alive or not, I don't like by that argument people that are brain dead aren't worth protecting. And-
But I mean,
maybe-
isn't that how it is though?
what was it?
Isn't that when we decide somebody's dead? Is when they're brain dead?
Not to everyone.
Why?
You know,
I think
people
the-
still value that.
I don't think so. I think typically when you're brain dead, that's when they're like time of death, you're dead, right? Heart death isn't, because you can still keep a heart pumping or some blood pumping for a while. But like brain death is like once you're brain dead, you're brain dead, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think some people would disagree. Like, if I had a relative who was like completely devoid of function, I wouldn't want to pull the plug on them.
Would you keep them alive? Like, let's say you have a 55-year-old and they're brain dead, but their body could live on until they're like 80, 90 years old.
It
Would you?
depends on what they want, and I don't think.
Let's say they say, I want you to keep my body alive for as long as possible, and they go brain dead at 55. Would you hook it up to a machine and keep the body pumping for?
If that's what they want.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and I think, like, if you're basing off of brain function, that's not keeping to the premise of life or not. You know, that's like your perception of what is worth saving, as opposed to what is a living being or not.
Well, yeah, but I think like obviously living being isn't enough. There's got to be something more. Otherwise, we would all be vegans and protecting insects and
Yeah,
right.
true.
We're drawing some boundaries around like what part of a living being is worth protecting or not, right?
That's fair, and you know, I'll admit that my viewpoint is idealistic. You know, the heartbeat's pretty early within the development of a baby,
Mm-hmm.
but I think to go with that, you would have to implement societal change to free pregnancy tests and like regular pregnancy testing for people that are sexually active. That would be my idealistic view of, you know, if you're gonna limit abortion to a certain point, you have to allow this stuff to occur.
Sure.
Because other than that, you can't reliably say, oh yeah, we gave people enough chances to get an abortion before the baby was alive. So there's a lot of, for me, in my idealistic point of view, there's a lot of societal changes that would need to be implemented, and that relies on the responsibility of a lot of people. But I think that's a point in the pro-life, pro-choice argument, whether people should be able to use abortion as a form of birth control. And I know it's not super common, but that's important when considering it.
Okay.
And I feel like people that do end up getting later abortions, they would have gotten one earlier had they been aware. And that's where like my idealistic societal change comes in. You'd have to provide people with the resources to know they're pregnant. And pregnancy tests aren't that expensive, but at that point, they should be readily accessible to everyone. Financial status shouldn't be a barrier.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like if you want to be part of the class that's restricting abortions more, you need to provide a lot more resources for people to avoid being pregnant or get tested early.
For sure.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
It was just cool.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I appreciate it, man.
For sure. You have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
I'm going to be arguing from the pro-life side of things. So it's kind of in consideration to I'm as pro-life as you would be considered pro-choice. So
Okay.
we both have...
Wait, real quick. What's your name?
My name's Jonathan.
Jonathan. Okay.
Yeah. So we're both arguing from here. I take it from you would probably wouldn't want to permit people killing unborns right up until conception.
Yeah, like past 24 weeks, I think it gets pretty sketchy. Like third trimester abortion is probably no good. Yeah.
Right. So in the consideration that there is listed for here, I'm kind of arguing in the preservation of the life order, where I would be more for reducing the window of available elective abortions. So a lot of the discussions that I see that happen online or the discourse today is always about the externalities. So rape, incest, ectopic pregnancies. By far, I think that counts for maybe being generous about 7 to 8% of all of abortions.
Probably even less than that, but yeah.
But yeah, just saying on the high side, I think everyone right now would probably be beneficial to discuss all the elective abortions that take place, and that primary window is anywhere from say like 7 weeks all the way up to maybe 24.
Okay.
Is about where it goes from. So my argument would be what type of information would be provided to you, because you're at 24.
Yeah.
What would you need to shorten that window further?
I think if you can show me that like there are the necessary brain structures that are communicating in such a way that like a conscious experience is possible, I think once that's been established for a person, I think you have to protect it from that point forward. So like if somebody could demonstrate that, well, actually at 8 weeks, these brain structures have formed and they're already communicating with each other, there might be a conscious experience there, then I say, okay, well, we probably should only have abortion up to 8 weeks.
So in that discussion from it, you're saying for your conscious experiences, the ability to start coming through those memories. So earlier you were discussing it's like, hey, these building plans are here. We have everything here for the potentiality of life. So the end goal is that it's already set in motion, and those building plans, even if they were destroyed, it's more of the I guess the plan going forward. Like you would feel different about, say, we have building plans and everything, but if it's already being built, it's already being there, and then someone comes in and destroy it, even though it was planning to be a building, you still kind of on the edge of things where you're like, well, it wasn't exactly a building at that point. So the conscious experience and live experience could still be applied to those of up to 9 months of being delivered to term. How do you develop when that conscious experience would not be safeguarded? Because in my plan for it would be to have a more rigid structure on when exactly that definition be in place. Like personally from here, I think 12 weeks, maybe 14 to get any of the really gray areas out of it. But aside from that, even legislatively, we can have type of penalties in place to limit that outside of rape, incest, all the externalities, but reducing the in-turn harm of the potential well-being can be mitigated through
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I said, it's since for me it's only about the conscious experience. It would just be whenever the brain parts are there to deploy it, basically once they've developed and they've started communicating with each other. Something I would ask you though, if you want to narrow that window and you want to make it like way more restrictive to get abortions, why is it that some pro-life or anti-abortion people, why make an exception in the case of like rape?
So the exceptions itself is because overall in life we understand that there's not everything's going to be absolutely perfect. I mean,
well, sure, but I mean, like when we're talking about rules, we're trying to craft like a perfect set of rules. Understanding that some things are going to be like, I mean, not everything is perfect in life, but it feels like in the case of rape. Extreme analogy, okay? But like, here's an issue that I have. Sometimes people will be pro-life, but they'll say, well, if it's rape, that's different. We can have an abortion there, okay? It would be unfair if I dropped off a child at your doorstep and I just left it there and I ran away, right? Unconsensually, I'm giving you a kid, basically. But nobody would ever say if we opened the door and we saw a child we didn't want, we could just step on its head and crush it, right? Like that, obviously, that's not okay because you've decided as a child, we're not going to kill children, right? I don't understand how some people that are pro-life can say, I am pro-life because I think fetuses are alive and they're worth protecting, but in the case of rape, we should probably kill them. Like, it feels like you either have to protect it always or you can't protect it ever. How do you make an exception there?
The exception from here, well, a little bit different from here because I know that it's missing the forest for the trees. Everyone wants to be extremely tight on that. I think it's fine to have these type of externalities occur. If you're trying to argue from like an airtight life performance, they're probably just valuing at any portion of it. Doesn't matter how that baby was conceived or is going to be growing, that they see that as something that needs to be protected. But overall, like even if you allowed that small portion to go through, I mean, we all make those type of decisions every day where we know that the absolute good would be to never let any type of unborn, regardless of how it goes, be aborted. But if you let those small, it can be played ad infinitum or whatever to larger degrees, but overall, you're still saving 90% of those given child ever occurring into that situation.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying here, but so this is kind of the problem I have with even in speaking that terminology, like we're saving things, right? So from my perspective, there's not a conscious experience to speak of yet, right? So what you're essentially doing is you're trying to save a thing that doesn't exist yet. Now it's going to exist in the future, but then the cost on the other side of that is the mother has to be a breeding factory for 9 months, and then once it's born, the mother and potentially father or the state have to take care of the child until they're 18. So we're levying an extreme penalty, I would say. I think pregnancy and delivering and then having it for 18 years is a pretty big penalty, all on the back of saving something that isn't worth protecting yet, but will have a potential, or it has the potential to be in the future protected, so we should protect it now. I just don't feel like the trade-off is anywhere near
Would the trade-off,
worth it there.
So in order to find out that trade-off, would you agree then or change the mindset if we had a better education and understanding of what would partake if you didn't take all the preventative measures in place to even get to that position where you're making those decisions?
I mean, I'm always in favor of more. Abortion sucks. Abortion sucks. Even if you are pro-choice, I think liberals get a lot of this wrong. Having an abortion is a really big deal for some women. There's a lot of potential mental anguish. There's a lot of potential regret. There's a lot of questions. I think that progressives definitely do treat it a little bit too like, oh, go have as many as you want, blah, blah, which is really dumb.
Right now, the whole thing is abortion as a contraceptive, like abortion on demand.
Yeah, for sure.
And those type of degrees are abhorrent personally to me, but I understand where they're coming from. They don't want to give that inch just in case it goes even further.
Yeah, the issue is that on the other side, you should be aware of like the mental stuff, the psychological stuff that goes along with an abortion. But then on the other side, some of that stuff can come too from the fact that there are people on the right that like demonize the fuck out of it, right? You've got people that say you're a horrible person for doing it, you're all the other sexual shaming plus like the fact that you've murdered a child or whatever, and that can reinforce any bad thoughts like, tenfold. So I feel like abortion should be treated like a fairly serious medical procedure. I mean, it's not like open heart surgery, but like it's a pretty big deal. You should try to avoid it as much as possible insofar as we should be educating for contraception and all of that. But if you need an abortion, then I mean, you should be able to get one. But all of that, I think, stands aside from the moral question of like, it's an 8-week fetus, doesn't even have an experience yet. What is the harm? Like, who are you hurting by having the abortion?
But even at from 8 weeks to the 9 months, I mean, what is the harm involved if it never had an appreciable, valuable, conscious experience? So
I think at around like 20 to 24 weeks you start too. So like a baby at like 7 or 8 months is starting to communicate with its environment. It's having like an awareness of what it is like to be a thing.
But isn't that kind of in the same regards to like a stimuli of a single cell organism that you were saying beforehand?
No, I don't think so, because even at 24 weeks, like the human brain is probably more sophisticated in terms of deploying consciousness than probably even most animals, I would think. As unbelievable as that is, the human brains are incredibly sophisticated things.
So in that regard, so we know how the sophistication, wouldn't it be pertinent to deter any type of I guess the potential of harming that type of life at a narrower range? So that's why we would have those type of penalties to reduce that window to say like to 12 weeks, just to make sure we never even get to the gray area portion where
the gray area is like 20, 24. If you want to make it illegal at 18, then sure, maybe. But like 8 weeks is getting pretty early. 8-week pregnancy, you might miss. That's still a pretty close window.
Yeah, so I mean that's where the 12-week window would come in. But also the thing is to in order to get these type of restrictions even further, we would have to have other knock-on effects. We have to increase sexual education,
Of course.
the information that comes from those. But if we do have those provided, I'm guessing you would be willing to get that window restricted.
No. I don't think it's relevant. I understand why some people think it, like, they would push for it, but, like, I think your opinion on abortion should stand separate from all the other issues. Like, I don't accept the like, I think abortion is really bad, but it should be available because, like, women want it. Or I think that's a bad argument. I think you have to have a strong moral feeling about it. We can increase education for contraception and everything too. I think that's important, but just because more people are getting contraception doesn't mean that we're, like, changing our view of abortion. Like, because
Well, it's not so
at
much
risk
more
is
of
whether or
a-
not we're killing a
it's
person,
not so
right?
much more people are getting the contraception. We're just trying to avoid abortion even happening. So that's
Sure.
going to be reducing the amount of likelihood of killing a conscious actor, I guess, or a conscious being.
Sure, and I'll give you the last word on this. I think we should reduce the amount of abortion, but not because we're doing something really bad when an abortion happens, but just because abortion sucks, and we don't want people committing abortions if they don't have to. And I guess because in that narrow window where maybe at, like, 15 weeks you've got a very fast developing fetus that has consciousness, you would avoid that too. But generally it's because we should avoid abortions because abortions suck and there's better ways to go about contraception. And then I'll give you the last word. Go for it.
No, I think that's true. I mean, and what we can do for that regard is to avoid that aborting those type of conscious individuals within their body. But ultimately, the goal is just to make sure that you're taking the responsibility and knowing that there's, there's a laundry list of things that are coming up to that point that should be recognized before we even get to that point.
Okay, cool. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I don't want you to get sick, okay? Fuck it, go.
I guess I'll be arguing pro-life. So I'd say this question is kind of just a topic of, what is life worth moral consideration, right? So I guess how do you define that?
When I think of what is worth protecting, the definition that I've kind of arrived at is a thing that is capable of deploying consciousness. So when I look at, like, when does life end, seems to be when we stop having a conscious experience. When I look at when does life begin, I'd probably say similarly, it's when we have a conscious experience. And when I think about, like, the types of things that we deal with for, like, who do we give moral consideration to, it's usually things with a conscious experience. So for a lot of people, that is humans with conscious experiences. For some people, it includes even animals with conscious experiences. So that's my definition. So when it comes to abortion, at around 24 weeks, I think the fetus has all of the necessary parts in their brain to begin to deploy consciousness. That's when I think it's worth protecting. But prior to that, it hasn't even had an experience yet. So I think it's okay to terminate the pregnancy without nothing lost.
Okay. I guess as a follow-up to that, I would say, so specifically on consciousness, like, okay, let's say someone's sleeping. Could I just kill them while they're asleep? Because they're not conscious, right?
Mm-hmm. So a sleeping person doesn't have consciousness, but they have the capacity to deploy consciousness. They had an experience prior. They're going to have an experience after. I think like an abated experience, like somebody sleeping, is a bit different than somebody that hasn't even begun to exist yet. That,
Okay.
on the moral side, and then on the practical side, nobody would sleep if they could just be killed when they were asleep, because it's not morally okay to do so,
Yeah.
really.
Okay. What
But
about
also, like, a sleeping person could be, like, woken up. Like, they can deploy conscious immediately. Like, they have the capacity to do so.
Right. Okay, so then I guess what about someone in a coma, where it's like more ambiguous whether, they have the capacity to.
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
coma thing, I think the way that it plays out intuitively, I think actually supports my argument, where if you have a person in a coma, I mean, what is the main question? There's one question that we usually ask when somebody's in a coma.
Mhm.
What do you think the question is?
How likely are they to get back up?
Exactly. So if you've
Okay.
got somebody in a coma, we think they're going to wake up eventually. Usually we want to preserve the body for as long as possible. We don't really care about the function of the body, but we want to preserve it as much as possible.
Okay.
But even if the body is perfectly functioning, but it seems like they're never going to become conscious again, then we would say, like, okay, well, at some point you have to terminate the person, right? You don't keep, like, comatose people alive until they die of old age, right?
Okay. I guess the reason I'm asking these questions is just to, like, when we define, what life is worth moral consideration, we want to, like, include all the life that, we agree that we should protect, and we should exclude all the life that I guess we don't want to protect.
Oh, I'm
sorry.
sorry. Yeah, speaking of the mic more, yeah.
Sorry. So I guess I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so I guess, like, I want to exclude life that we don't want to protect. You mentioned veganism, I guess.
Yeah, you're
I'm
trying to
guessing
create a
that-
bar that's high enough to protect all the life that we want to
Yeah.
protect, but low enough that we
it protects
kid out
everything.
things we don't want to protect, like
Exactly.
insects, right?
So
Yeah.
I can think of situations where, like a baby is conscious, but
Yep.
is it consciousness that we, like, I would say it's consciousness worth protecting. I'm just saying, like, consciousness I feel like is, like, such a, I guess, vague thing that's very transient, very, like we don't even really have a very good definition of what it is. So why use that as the basis for something as important as, you know, life worth moral consideration, you know?
Yeah, I think that it is transient for sure.
Sorry.
It is kind of vague for sure. But it does seem to be like the defining characteristic of what we consider to be life. Like if you want to argue with a vegan, they're not going to argue that like animals, you know, like run away when they get scared or anything like that. They'll argue that, well,
Right, but
animals have a level of consciousness. Yeah.
Sorry, you're arguing that, well, I'm guessing you're not a vegan, so you're arguing that we shouldn't include animals in that bubble, right?
Well, we're not talking about veganism at all
I
right now.
understand, but I guess if you're going to have that bar, you have to like say, okay, this is why we're not including animals, but we are including.
Well, if you want to talk about veganism, come next month when I do the veganism debate.
Gotcha.
But no, I mean, I can agree to some extent. I think there are. I think most people should probably be vegan based on how they figure their life out in the world. I'm personally not, but it's a different conversation. But
Okay.
I will say though, like to recenter though, to bring up veganism briefly, when vegans try to defend the proposition that animals should be given moral consideration, it's usually because they have conscious experiences, which I think
Okay.
points to the importance of like, what is it like to experience things? What is it like to be something? And then should
Okay.
that experience be protected by other people? And that experience seems to transcend just like a body that's functioning or responding to like a poke or something. It seems to be like the capacity to have this like whole experience of existing. And fetuses don't have it before like 20 to 24 weeks. So like, you're gonna, like what's being lost by terminating like an early fetus?
Okay. Yeah, I'll just go back to the vagueness. Like I can think of like, what if someone's like so mentally disabled or something? Like that consciousness, is that still worth protecting? Like using
I mean-
consciousness as a criterion, I feel like can run into serious problems. I don't know.
I don't think so. I think it keeps us pretty consistent. I mean, like the serious problems on the other end are we have to outlaw all abortion, right? Which
I
is
mean,
a pretty serious
I don't
thing.
think it's a problem, but
You don't
why
think
is
it's
it
a problem? Well, I mean, one, we're men, so. But two, like so, like here's like this is always like the classic challenge you give to people that are anti-abortion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we say that abortion is illegal, right? What do you essentially do when you have an abortion?
Was this about legality? Because I mean,
Well, but I mean, it's going to extend if you can make it immoral.
Okay,
it's probably
sure.
going to be illegal
Okay,
too,
sure.
right? Because you're saying we should be against it, right?
Mhm.
So if we say that it's immoral and we make it illegal, what is the punishment for an abortion? Like, are women going to jail now for murdering a fetus, or?
Yeah, I think. I mean, there are different degrees of murder as well, right? So I think.
I mean, it's murder though. It's like first degree murder. If you're like taking like if you were to feed your child pills to kill the child, that's first degree murder, right? If you were to feed
Uh-huh. Right.
yourself pills to kill a fetus, if we're saying abortion
Right.
is illegal, and I'm not.
I mean,
necessarily
I would bite
yeah.
the bullet on that and say, yeah, sure.
Okay.
but-
Well, I would say that's a big problem. So I
Why
think
is
on
that a
my
big
end, I
problem?
don't think what.
I mean, why is it a big problem?
Well, because I think sending women to jail for having abortion is a big problem. You also have to deal with the fact that there's like ongoing like millions of poor children dying because like a fetus either doesn't implant correctly, or you've got ectopic pregnancies, or you've got like a whole bunch of other like random things.
Yeah,
I feel like my definition is like pretty consistent. Like not too many. You're not killing sleeping people. You end lives of like people in a permanent coma, which we already do, and it protects a woman's right to have an abortion by like 20 to 24 weeks, which is plenty of time to identify that you're pregnant, have an abortion, and I think it keeps like all the life safe that we want to keep safe, and lets us not worry about stuff that I don't think we should be worrying about.
Okay. I guess
I'll give you the last word on it. Go for it.
Yeah, I guess just to respond with the women thing, I guess we can treat it as like, they're a product of the society that we live in today, and we can kind of treat it as like, I don't know about moral relativism, but relativistically, they're not committing anything heinous based on the standards of today's society. So we can probably be a little more lenient on them for at least the time being.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think maybe I'm a little more iffy on like just starting at life at conception, but yeah, I'm still a little unsure, I guess.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the conversation.